Hi, I'm Ramanand, and welcome to this episode of the CTQ Smartcast. I have Deepak here with me. Hi, Deepak. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good.
Yeah, that's pleasure
Deepak,
to
I
be
think.
here.
Thank you. Deepak, there is so much to talk to you about. So let's get right into it. Uh, so here's a question. Your
Sure.
LinkedIn profile says the Chuck story is available on request. Why are you called Chuck? I don't know if anyone has taken you up on that. So let me ask you why you're called Chuck.
Fair enough. It's interesting enough that you dug that out from my LinkedIn profile of all places. It's a very sad story, Ramanand. And I'm I mean, there's no profound story to this really. When I was in college, I used to make a lot of bad jokes. A bad joke in Malayalam slang is called chali, which literally means mud.
Correct.
And a clever friend just put together Chali and Deepak and got Chuck. That's it. That
I'm
is really it. The other option was Chaddi, which was thankfully vetoed by everyone who was present. So yeah, so that's that's why I'm
I'm
called Chuck, and it's just stuck. It's just stuck ever since. I honestly never thought that it would stick around for as long as it did.
Yeah, I'm both mildly sorry and mildly happy that it was safe for work sort of a story. So
Yeah, I mean, considering that it did become a work email ID as well later. So yeah, very happy that that worked out. But honestly, I didn't expect it to become like my identity in some sense in a few years later.
I mean, often, I mean, you have a show around the origin of things, right? So, and I think as you amply illustrated in some of your shows, origins, sometimes you don't really know when something is
Yeah,
going to get started off. So I
yeah.
think we can chalk this down to one of those as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I love doing these sort of thought experiments as well. Like I was hugely fascinated by this movie and concept called the butterfly effect.
Mm,
So in some sense, you really don't know what you're starting. I mean, it could be
correct.
something. It could be the start of a beautiful relationship with somebody. It could be the start of a great idea. It could be the start of a company. You never really know. So just shoot your shot. Put things out there. Give yourself as many chances as possible, and yeah, I guess things will work out.
So let's rewind the clock a little bit and do another origin story.
Yeah, sure.
Uh, I mean, one thing that is difficult with someone like Deepak Gopalakrishnan Chuck is how do you describe yourself, right? How do you introduce yourself and do justice to your introduction on an episode like this? So because you have not done the full time employment thing, or you
Mm,
used to do it and you're no longer doing it. So when did you decide to get out of full time employment, and what led to that?
okay. I'll answer the first part of that since you asked me how I would introduce myself. I think it's a matter of horses for courses. It
Mm,
depends on what the context the introduction is going to be used for. If I were to pitch myself to a client for marketing purposes, then obviously I would play up that angle of things. The fact that spent about a decade or so in the advertising industry, marketing industry, doing these kind of projects. Oh, and by the way, I also run some podcasts and newsletters, etc., etc. On the other hand, if I was actually say doing a podcast assignment or somebody were to say, hey, we'd like you to do something with respect to podcast, and obviously I'll play up that aspect saying that I'm a host of this so many episodes, etc., etc. So I think again it's a matter of horses for courses with respect to how I introduce myself really, and I think that should be the case. I think
mm.
one bio really does not I'm not saying this for myself, for everybody. I think everybody should tailor whatever they're doing when they're sending it across to somebody. Um, Coming to the actual question you asked, which was sorry, I forgot myself.
Which was yeah, there's so much to talk about, right? So you often get
Yeah,
distracted. So let me go
old
back.
age,
How did
old
you get
age.
out of full-time employment? What
Yeah.
happened behind that?
Yeah, so like I said, I did spend about a decade in advertising and marketing roles of various kinds. Spent about 7-8 years in agencies themselves, and then I spent 2 to 3 years in the events and ticketing space, OML and Insider. I didn't really shift companies. Actually, what ended up becoming Insider was initially a part of OML. It segued, it transitioned, and then it got bought over by Paytm. So I was part of that transition. So even though it might seem that I worked in two different companies, it was really the same organization going through a bit of a restructure. And I love my time over there. I absolutely loved what I was doing, the things that were happening over there, etc. But for me, I think a point came when I realized that uh, I wasn't enjoying what I was doing anymore, and I didn't really see the scope for what I wanted to do happening in this particular company for a number of reasons. I mean, all the people there are lovely, don't get me wrong. It wasn't a matter of leaving my boss, as as a case very often tends to be. For me, it was very clear, like what I wanted to do and what I felt I could contribute to the company. They didn't need me at that point of time. I think that's the best way to kind of put it, right? Because of various things. They were going through transition. A bigger company had come in and they had put a lot of equity inside, put a lot of stake in the company. So their imperatives were somewhere else. And I could see that writing on the wall. And at the same time, I was toying around with this idea of wanting to freelance. I really didn't want to go back to advertising, and I didn't ever fancy myself on the client side of things. So I thought, all right, this might be an interesting time to do this as well. Like, things are fairly fine financially. Wife has a job as well. There's no really problem. And for me, I always look at these sort of big shifts. I always ask myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that could happen is, all right, I don't make any money as a freelancer. I know that there are some doors open for me, touch wood. So that really was it. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it, speaking to some very smart people, friends, and finally just decided to do it. I think that is I think that is the point. I think that was the point I realized, hey, I could actually do something like this, and finally just having the guts to go ahead and do it. I knew it was this time or never. And that was really when I decided to quit. I think that was end of 2018. I decided to do that. So yeah, from beginning of 2019 or so, I've been freelancing full time. I think the one advice I would say for somebody who is looking for not just a shift like that, but any career at all, is something I've often said is whether the pull is bigger than the push. Sometimes, very often, when we shift jobs, it's the push is larger. Oh, I hate my boss. I hate the accounts that I'm working on. I hate this environment. All right, but if you're going to somewhere else, which is sort of like the same structure, chances are things will happen like that. And it's happened to all of us. Not saying that it hasn't happened to me also. I think at one point, when you know that the pull is more than the push, that's when you know, okay, I think then you're also reasonably excited as well, because there's a certain bit of the unknown also with respect to where you're going. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
It does, and so many things that you said, resonated with me as well, because my co-founder, we went through a similar sort of journey, setting up Choose to Think, and I think we should also thankful to our respective wives, and so here's to the wives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Helping us, take that, because it's really hard. It takes a ecosystem for one to survive. It's rarely that you set off on your own. So that's why a lot that you said really struck home for me as well. So talk to me about that decision process a little bit more in detail. You said you spoke to a few friends.
Yeah.
Were you already starting to think about, say, a portfolio or a bit of work, side gigs? Did it already happen? Or because this is something a lot of people would like to explore. They would like to answer the call of the pull. But how do you navigate those without drowning in that chasm, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, good question. Excellent question. I think, so I'll tell you my story first, and then I'll tell you how this sort of decision became logical and easy for me. So I said I'd made this decision in end 2018. Now, since 2010, I've been freelancing in some capacity or the other. All sorts of things: writing, cartooning, doing all sorts of random things here and there. It was always very clear that it was not related to my actual day job. I think, one, from a conflict of interest point of view, and two, just from a doing something else point of view. And I think there's a lesson in there also. If you're just doing more of the same, unless you're doing it for money, it's probably not advisable, because you're going to face that same frustration. Not to mention, if your office finds out, you'll probably be in hot water. So I had some experience and I had some body of work. So when I was pitching myself as a writer, even if it was slightly dated work, I still did have some amount of work. I also had some contacts. I had some people who said, hey, why have you stopped writing for us? Would you be interested again? Or would you like to, take the stuff up again? So I already had some contacts to fall back on. Plus, I think the biggest advantage for me was I'd spent a fair bit of time in the industry. again, touch wood, I had some good contacts who were reasonably okay with my skills and all that. I try to be easy to work with because I find that might be a little painful to do in the short term. It really makes things easier for you in the long term, and that really helped me. So when I put out a couple of tweets or LinkedIn posts saying, "Hey, I'm now looking to be a freelancer," etc., a lot of people actually said, "Hey, I worked with this guy in the past. He's really good to work with," etc. And I realized, yeah, okay, all those times where I made it easy to work with others. And again, this is not a boast or something. I think
Correct.
being easy to work with is genuinely the most selfish thing that you can do for yourself, for your career, etc. It just makes things so much easier for you in the long run. So I had this body of work and I had a few contacts, etc. So when I decided to quit, I mean, it was a well thought through decision. It wasn't done on impulse. From the time the thought struck my head to the time I put in my papers, it must have been a good 2-3 weeks or something like that. So I charted out everything. I figured out, all right, this is what I'm going to do. This is the type of people, this is the kind of work that I want to do. This is where I see, this is the goal I want to set myself in the first year. And honestly, that was just, I want to make the same amount of money as I'm doing in my day job, which I think is a reasonable sort of target to have. And I was just, okay, this is the kind of things I want to try doing, rather than the stuff I'm used to, my safe zone and all that. So I'm plotting out a few targets and stuff for myself. Once I actually then put in my papers, when I could, publicly ask for work on Twitter and all that. So then I spent the next 2 months were frantic with respect to at work. I wanted to make sure that, I didn't want to I didn't want to burn bridges because I deeply respect all the people that I work with. All right, most of the people that I work with, and I knew that at some point of time, a lot of these were potential clients or potential collaborators. Right, it was a small industry after all. So frantic with respect to making sure everything at work was delivered, making sure handovers and all that was done in a good, proper fashion. And then at the same time, seeking out work and seeking out, building connections and all that, saying, hey, okay, my last day is Feb, whatever. So this day onwards, I'll start to work for you. Essentially, because of this, I was able to hit the ground running. I gave myself a couple of days off or something, but after that, it was pretty much hitting the ground running. And I think for anyone who's looking to get into freelancing, I'd say that a good amount of planning is absolutely essential. Now, planning could be a number of things. It could be, okay, what am I actually going to do? I think the most important thing from a freelancer point of view is obviously where's the money going to come from, right? Then you need to think about, there are two things really. I think one is, okay, here's a skill I have which I can easily monetize. It may not be work that I enjoy, but it is work that I can very easily it is a skill that I can very easily monetize because there is also a market for this. For example, if you're a designer, there are hundreds of agencies looking for people to do social media posts, for instance, which is the lowest rung of graphic design work. Now, is it everybody's ambition to be that? Absolutely not. But is it a skill that you can readily, easily monetize? 100%. Which means that you can't afford to shun that completely immediately if you want to have a place to stay and food to put in your mouth. So from there, so you can draw a spectrum like this. Like, I don't want to do any, one of our famous marketing models or anything, but if you just draw a spectrum like that of work that you can know that you can monetize but don't necessarily enjoy, all the way to work that you can monetize and you enjoy, which is the golden spot to be in. Actually, it's less of a it's more a quadrant, actually, if you can picture that, right? So you obviously want to be here, right, which is good from a money point of view and good from a satisfaction point of view as well, whereas you may be down here and then you need to work over here. So I don't think you can shun one or the other. If you start off here, then great, amazing, you have a skill that you enjoy monetizing and there's people willing to pay you for it, fantastic. But assuming that the world wants this, that's a very, very bad idea. If you're a musician, you will have to do the Bollywood tribute gigs in order to pay the bills while you are working on your neo-prog metal album, which, let's face it, not everybody in Andheri is clamoring to hear, right? So I think it's an appreciation of that as well. Like, while you as an artist, and I say artist from any profession point of view, I think it's very important to be aware of reality, what the market really requires, right? And work accordingly and prep accordingly. All right, so it means that, okay, for the first couple of months, I will have to do this. Let's seek clients like that. Let's organize a work day so that, okay, 5 hours a day, I do this, which means at least my income is covered. My rent and my food and all the basic things are covered. And then for the remaining amount of day, you have to do this. You have to proactively go out and see how to bridge that gap. Otherwise, you're going to keep doing this work, the crap work that you don't enjoy. You're going to have to do some work for free. You may have to do some, you may have to pitch yourself saying, hey, listen, I've done this already, so I can very easily do something like this. So you have to actively work towards moving the quadrant. Otherwise you will always be in this lowest rung sort of thing. So I think any sort of, whichever freelancing career that you're going for, I think that amount of preparation is absolutely important. And I hope I've answered your question, because there are lots of ways in which you can sort of approach this. But the biggest failure that I've seen from freelancers is that it's just a lack of preparation, or it's a lack of knowing what this universe of freelancing actually entails. I'm sure you'll ask me more questions on that, but in essence, I would say, yeah, I would say at any point of time, you should have a very good idea of what your next 2 weeks looks like, a reasonable idea of what your next 3 months look like, and a decent, like a broad like my goals idea of what the next 1 year looks like. I would say if you have that, then you're more or less sorted with respect to freelance, and I say life itself.
Yeah, I think you can stretch that to so many things. I think what I picked up from what you just said is that a lot of it is reflection, understanding yourself, what you want to do. And I'm glad you didn't say things like passion, right? Because there is a sort of being very realistic about what things need to get done. And not just for freelancers. I think there are a lot of people who will be listening to us who are maybe professionals who've done 10, 20 years of work, are looking at alternative models, because we've been conditioned to think of a job after college, and that steady kind of ladder. And when you see people like yourselves try different things, I think it hopefully gives them another model to think about or consider, so which is great. The other thing I wanted to also pick up, which is kind of obvious but is worth calling out, is the fact that you had that LinkedIn, Twitter presence. In fact, we are meeting for the first time. I've done your digital marketing course earlier this year, but I've known about you for a while. And this is through first level, we've a lot of common contacts. LinkedIn always throws up things at you. So you've been on my radar, and I'm sure you'll be on the radar of a lot of people who may not be customers, collaborators today. But come a certain day, you're, thinking about a topic like, say, marketing, and you are one of the names that hopefully you want to come up with, right? So, and that's something that you also talk about in your course, that it's not really about, that's the branding marketing side of things. So, therefore, before I get a little deeper into that side, since you are a big music fan and you brought up the band analogy, let me stretch that a little bit and say that, so now you're the talent of your one-man band, but you're also the manager, and both have different desires and roles to play. And I now also maybe throw in the word that you're probably also the janitor. You'll have to also clean up behind the talent. What has been the upside and the downside of this mode of operation? Does it get overwhelming at days? How has that shift been for you? How do you play these different roles?
Yeah, I think, I think anybody who gets into freelancing the first 3 months, they will have immense respect for every department of the company that they left, including HR. Trust me on this. No, man, I think that's the other challenge, right? You need to be comfortable running your own one-person operation. By the way, update, thankfully for me, it's no longer a one-person update. My wife, who supported me so much during that time, she's also we both work together right now. So it's just the two of us, and we operate together as an entity called Rough Paper. So there's the two of us who's doing basically this sort of thing. And that's great, right? When you're able to collaborate with, your best friend, essentially. I think it's amazing. But your point is, the point that you're making still applies, whether it's a one person or a two-person operation. It is difficult. I will not lie that I will not lie. It is not easy to do all sort of roles together, because now when you look at it, what all are the things that you have to do? Firstly, you need to do the actual work that's going to get you money, no matter which part of the spectrum it is. Now all that comes under one part of what you need to do. Then there's another part which is business development, which is, you're actually going out and seeking work. Now when you I think a good way of going about this is, right, I think for every department, like what all do I need to do, if you start charting out those goals that I spoke about a while back, you just need to ask yourself, all right, for this, what do I need to happen, right? And then this is an exercise I would recommend for absolutely everybody, no matter whether you're looking to freelance, whether you're just confused about life, whatever it is. Take a piece of paper, say, okay, what do I want to be in 10 years or 5 years, whatever it is. Like, what is the ideal version of myself that I want to do? What is the ideal place that I see myself? What is my ideal day? As Amit Verma said in the first episode of Getting Meta, what is my
Correct.
ideal day look like? Which I think is a great way of thinking, a very realistic way of looking at it. And then ask yourself, okay, what's stopping me now from getting there? For example, if you ask this to somebody who is, say, typical midlife crisis in the early 30s or something like that, saying, I want freedom, happiness, whatever it is. Okay, what is stopping you from doing that right now? If it seems that a large part of what is stopping you is actually job related, then the elephant in the room is right there. You need to solve that problem. Now, at a more micro level, say at a freelancer point of view, I say, okay, I want to, for example, and this is a real example that I'm going to be giving you, I want to write more about music. It is a dream of mine to be published in a place like a Pitchfork or a Loudwire or something like that. I know I can do it, very possibly. I need to think of, okay, what is stopping me from doing that right now? What is the impediment? One could be time, two could be lack of experience, right, in something. I can't just go up to a Pitchfork or a Rolling Stone and say, hey, listen, I love music, please let me write for you. That's not going to happen. So it means that I need to do some prep work before that. Maybe it means I write on a blog of my own for some time. Maybe it means I find a smaller website and contribute to them, where they will be more willing to accept what I have to say, for example. So then you start solving problems. And when these solutions to these problems actually give you tasks for your medium term and your short term, if you think about it, right? So if I say in a year's time, I want to have a byline in Rolling Stone, then I know then in 2 months' time, I need to have a blog with 15 pieces of content, or I need, something else. So the long-term goal, the long-term vision that you have sort of manifests itself in these small goals that you have. And that translates itself to the answer to your question, which is basically what are the other things that I need to do, which means business development automatically solves it, which means that at some point of time, okay, say 4 months down the line, is when I actively start business development for this goal of mine, which is I will start reaching out to a Metal Hammer, Loudwire, etc., etc. So that becomes my business development over there. Okay, if I'm going to do more of that, it means that it means I might need to do some more of the crappy work in order to put a roof over my head, which means that I then need to go back to that client who asked me, can you take on more work? So business development happens over there. Again, all this HR fits in beautifully. This is how my career trajectory is moving. At the same time, you need to keep your finances in mind. That's where your finance team comes in. And of course, you need to clean up the mess all the time. So janitors present at all points of time. So I think once you start, I mean, there are many models and ways, I guess, one could approach this, but I think the simplest way of doing this is just asking yourself, okay, what do I need to do in order to get there? Everything then will end up answering itself. And I think it also helps because it's all in vision of something. It's all in, you have that sort of goal in mind at the end. Then you don't think of it in terms of, okay, this is the BD part of my life, this is the HR part of my life. Everything is together coordinated towards one, the thing. The Neil Gaiman has this beautiful little short story that he wrote about for content creators, which is, keep moving towards that mountain. There are going to be lots of distractions around the way, and you will be tempted to move around, but take whatever path you want, as long as you're more or less moving towards the mountain, moving towards the mountain. I think that's a great way of thinking about it. So honestly, that's about it. That's how I think about it. And it served me reasonably well, I would like to think, but it is not easy because there are some parts of this that come naturally to some people, I guess, and not so to others. Like a designer, again, for instance, and I'm saying the typical kind of designer, they may be very good at design, they will be excellent with respect to design, but they may not be the most social of people. So for them, business development might become an issue. Okay, then how do I solve that problem? There are ways of solving this problem, and I don't intend to turn this into advice for each and every category, but
Correct.
there are ways of solving. At least now you know what the roadblock is going to be. How you know that unless this problem is cracked, you know that you will not go to the next step. So how do you solve that problem? Do you then overcome your fear and then send out that email? Do you collaborate with a friend? Do you ask somebody else who's done that before? So you need to find, you know that this is a problem that needs solving. Just closing your eyes and hoping that it'll go away and magically the dream client is going to come to you, that's never going to happen. So yeah, that's how I think about it. I think it served me. I think it served me reasonably well. Also because I'm the kind of person who likes to take charge of what I'm in control of, and I think that's just the kind of person I've always sort of been. I like having things in control. So I think I work reasonably well in a one person, or now of course 2-person small operation. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, if you really cast your mind back to the origin of the word freelancer, right? It was someone who was a soldier, who was, who had a lot of control over who he could work for. And in some sense, I feel that in modern times of the word freelancer has become this, gun for hire kind of thing, and not considered very high in the social hierarchy of sorts. So I think the operative word is free. I think we are looking for control. And I mean, just to throw in a framework, even though we've tried our best to stay out of models and quadrants, is this, Dan Pink has made famous this intrinsic motivation model, where he talks about, people want control, or they want mastery, or they want, and there are other aspects to it, like purpose and connectedness. But control is, I think, a big feature of why some people turn on their own. And I think that free is a very important word for people to realize that that's what they're looking for.
Absolutely, 100%.
And I think that's where your what you mentioned about not running away from something, that you don't like your boss, and therefore it's not a good enough reason to be a freelancer, because you will find someone else you don't really like pretty soon.
Exactly. You're not, you won't be running away from a problem, because that same thing that annoys you, you need to figure out what is it that you're running away from, and get to a place where that you will never be faced with that sort of issue again. For example, you might be running away from you may realize that tight corporate structures is what's annoying
stifling
you. Great, it is stifling you. Great. In which case, a smaller company, or if you work on your own, absolutely that'll go in. And by the way, I completely agree with what you said right now. One of the things I always tell people who are looking to freelance is find out why you are freelancing. Like everybody's motivations are different. Some people will want more control of their life. Some people will just be in it for the money. Some people will want to explore their creative self. And let's face it, some people might not be in a position to work for whatever reason it is, physical, or they're having a family, or whatever it is, full time. So figure out what the major constraint or motivator for you is. For me, very clearly, it was control. I was tired of being tossed about by various people on Slack, had enough of that. So I said, okay, I need to reach a place where only I have myself to blame, and that's what I was working towards. I think it sounds cliched, but I think it's very important. Like, for example, my life would be very different if I realized that if I thought I was in it for the money. I know that I can very easily, not very easily, double what I'm making right now if that was my primary goal. But then that would sacrifice a lot of things. I wouldn't be doing a lot of the other things I'm actually passionate about. So yeah.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about these systems and processes that now help you function. So let me take a specific example. Now, we spoke about the fact that you have a lot of podcasts, you have your writing, you have a newsletter that you send out, and you've committed because it's a paid newsletter. So you have a lot of these visible commitments. Plus, there is going to be, I think, also people need to realize that any form of entrepreneurship involves burstiness. You get work coming in suddenly, and then there is periods of lull and so on. So what have you set up for yourself that lets you be productive? Were you always the kind who got stuff done, or you've just now put together these systems that say that, I have a calendar, I have an appointment, I have slots? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I genuinely don't know where this this tag of productive has sort of come in. Yeah, I mean, I guess I've always been the type who's got stuff done. I'll be very honest. I think, and I know this might seem a little counterintuitive, but I think a lot of my so-called productivity comes out of the fact that I'm intrinsically quite lazy. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. When I was in advertising, for instance, I saw the mistakes that other people would make, which would lead to rework for them. Right? I would anticipate this well in advance. So, for example, if I wanted to pitch a weird route to a client, right? I said, okay, what if the client doesn't like this? So take 5 minutes more when you're in that flow. Give a safe route also. It saves yourself work later, right? You might have something on a slide which, say, your servicing counterpart might not understand and might call an entire meeting just to explain that. Take the time to put some notes in the comments saying, this is what I mean by this, I'll change this is what the client will take, etc., etc. Build that context. It's sort of like cliched now to say the word empathy, but I think that's genuinely the thing that will get you ahead in life. To me, I defined it this way. Put yourself in the shoes of whoever is going to be seeing this content and think through any and every question that they may have and account for it. That's genuinely it. That's something that I try to do during the course itself. Hopefully it worked. It's something I do every time I put out a newsletter. It's something I do every time I send something to a client, for instance, like, okay, this is the problem. I have been known for notoriously over-explaining my email. My emails have sometimes been very long, and maybe that's a part of the success that's come into the career. Maybe the guy writes long emails and he can't be a complete idiot. But I think that's one thing that sort of worked for me. I try to anticipate. I try to account for worst case scenarios and all that, and I account for it in my work. So that could be one way of getting things done, I suppose. The second thing, and this is something that I noticed about myself when I was at OML, which is a very Slack-heavy organization, is that I do not reply asynchronously. I reply asynchronously. I work best asynchronously. I actually turn Slack off during the day. Which might seem like, oh wow, how can you do that? Unless, of course, it's like a live project or something. If Weekender is happening and you're not on Slack, you can't afford to reply the next morning, right? So obviously you account for situation like that. But by and large, what I do is I turn Slack off, and when I'm doing work, I like to just finish that off and then move on to something else. Of course, it creates problems at some points of time, saying that, hey, I pinged you 2 hours ago, and now you're replying. That sort of thing tends to happen. But I think over time, what ends up happening, and I've heard this being repeated by people way more successful, intelligent, smarter than me on several other podcasts, including Naval and Tim Ferriss and all that, is that when you build up a reputation like this, people know that, okay, when he gets to my work, I know that he's not going to be distracted by another Slack ping, for example. So I think I built up that reputation over a period of time. Again, if you think about it, all this ties back to the laziness. Why am I doing this? Because I want to get done with stuff earlier, leave so I can attend a gig or something like that, right? So all of this hustling to be productive ends up, it's a complete byproduct of the fact that I want control over my time. I find it like, I don't know whether it's because I worked in the strategy department in an agency or whatever. But I worked in two notoriously difficult or time crazy industries, which is events and advertising. And to date, I haven't missed a weekend trek or a gig that I had planned or whatever it is. I'm not being boastful again. I think it's just a matter of expectation setting. Because if I'd like to think that if I have, and I also make it a point to say well in advance, hey guys, I need to leave at 6 today because there's a gig happening at IIT Bombay, which I can't afford to miss. People will know that it is in my own best interest to have built up a reputation that, okay, if some work comes at 7, I know that I will get it by this guy will somehow or the other make sure that I get it by 10 in the morning tomorrow, right? That's something I've never missed. And again, I'm not trying to be boastful or sound virtuous or something. It is something that I need to do so that I can make all the other things that are important to me in my life happen. So I think productivity ended up becoming, a thing because of that. Right now, it's kind of interesting because a lot of people have asked me about productivity and all that. And honestly, getting Meta started because I didn't have answers to a lot of these questions. I had my own theories, but I don't consider myself an expert in those. some are being validated, some are being okay, those are like unique to me, I can't extrapolate that to everybody, those sort of things. But I think right now for one, I am like, for me, Google Calendar is like uh, uh, like I can't function without it. I need to know what's happening on the next day and next week. Like I said, have excellent visibility over what your next 2 weeks
Correct.
looks like, decent visibility over months, so on, so on. So you and everybody works in a different model, right? Some people may not be comfortable tying themselves to a Google Calendar, and saying, like, for example, right now I have an Excel sheet that tells me, okay, over the next month, how much hours per week am I spending on individual projects that I have? So hence, how much free time do I have? Hence, etc., etc. Some people might find that's too regimented for them. Fair enough. Find your own model. What is it that works for you? How would you define? Again, like I say, always have the end thing that you want and then work backwards. Don't say, I am a free spirited kind of person. All right, that's great. But what does that lead to? You need the end goal and then work backwards and then fit in your respective constraints accordingly. And I think that's what's worked for me, to be very honest. It's interesting about the newsletter that you said paid, and yes, I did make it paid so that I myself would be committed to pushing it out. I've done a lot of projects where I actually do commit to putting things out. I think that keeps me updated. It forces me to be updated on things. By the way, for people who don't know, obviously you know this because you were part of the course. But the newsletter that Ramanand is talking about is a newsletter called Things of Internet, which sells for the cheap price of 3,000 a year. Initially, it was meant to be a newsletter that went out to all students of my course with one case study a week. Because I tend to read a lot of the marketing kind of things to keep myself updated. So I thought, okay, this is a nice value add. Plus, it will force me also to, keep finding something new. And then a friend said, hey, listen, I don't want to take your course because I know digital, but I'm willing to pay for that newsletter. I thought, oh, okay, that's an interesting idea. And then that became a newsletter on its, completely different product, if I may, on its own. So that was the origin. That's the origin of that. And I realized by making it paid, it actually forces me. That's a responsibility. I'd like to think $300 a year is not too much, but at the same time, somebody has paid money. Somebody has reposed faith in you for that. Doesn't matter whether you read it or not. Your responsibility is to get it out because somebody's paid for it. And similarly with a lot of other things that I do, which I try to podcast by nature, obviously you have to deliver at a certain time, and you need to for example, if you can't do it for a period of time, then bring some closure to it so that people aren't left hanging, which is why the origin of things, for example, is in seasons format. It's very difficult to do it on a very, very regular basis. I write in bursts and finish off, like 10 at a go, that sort of thing. Third Slip was a newsletter that a friend and I ran we're very proud of it, for about 200 odd weeks at a stretch, with all sorts of family lives, job changes, vacations, everything. I was at the campsite of a metal fest and I was like writing newsletter on my tablet and things. So also things have happened, and we're very proud of that. I think when you have people, when you make a public commitment to anything, be it a project or even indeed something like losing weight or quitting smoking or something like that, I think the social pressure, I mean, there's a little bit of social pressure out there that you have put yourself out and all that. I think that really, really helps. So yeah, for anyone who wants to do something, I would highly, highly recommend putting something out there. So if you're a designer, for instance, trying to do more projects, say, okay, I'm going to do one cool thing a month, for instance, right? Or week or whatever the case may be. People aren't going to, let's face it, there's so much content doing the rounds. People aren't going, oh, is Abhay going to send me this perfect, this newsletter today or something? Nobody's going to ask that. But at the same time, you have to be known as the person who does that. And I want to go back to one of the earlier things that you said, which was, and I call this signaling, which is people, not everybody in your network is going to consume the content that you put out. You have to face that fact. You need to have enough of you have to put your ego on the back burner. We'd like to think as content creators that when we put out a podcast, all 2,000 Facebook friends are going to rush and consume it immediately, stop what they're doing on a Monday morning and listen to your 30-minute podcast. They're not. Let's face it, they're not. But some of them will. Some of them will love it as well. What is important, however, is for a reasonable part of your network to know what you're doing broadly. As a result of which, I would like to think that over these 10 years, now I'm not a networker. I've never gone to a single networking event, and genuinely, I genuinely can't reach out to a random stranger on LinkedIn and say, hey, I came across your profile, thought it was interesting, I thought I'd add you. And I still find it very weird when people do that to me. But I think it's very important for me, for example, to have, say, 50% of my network know that I know something with respect to digital. And this has happened. I've had, for example, my juniors from Mica, who have known me well personally because of the time at Mica, who will reach out to me and say, hey, I asked around and you seem to be the best guy who gets digital. So can you help us with this problem? Now that turns into something which turns into a project, which turns into something else, right? So that sort of signaling for yourself. They may not have a requirement, but somebody else might. They may not consume your content, but it's important. Like, I'm so surprised the number of people who, from my engineering college, who have absolutely no idea about the marketing side of me, they reach out and say, you keep posting digital, you know this. No, somebody in our company asked for something. Can I connect you guys? So that's what you need to put yourself out there in some level. And when I say put yourself out there, you don't need to be an influencer. You don't need to constantly create content on a daily, weekly basis. Opinions on this will vary, but I find that extremely inauthentic to do. And to me, like I said, for me, my base is laziness, right? Which is why I don't like lying, because it means you need to remember two different things. Right. So for me, the easiest is to, okay, like this is it, take it or leave it. If you leave it, then great. I don't need to work on whatever it is that you want me to do. So
Right.
I think I know a lot of rambles over there. And I've even forgotten what your original question was, but I hope I've answered it in some sort of way. I think that's about networks. Yeah, I think that's broadly it.
In fact, a lot of what you mentioned, it really something that we have also, I think, espoused this. So, for instance, we have something that we call CTQ compounds, wherein a group of people come together to read, every day.
That's
so,
amazing.
we initially, when we thought, right, I mean, we are readers. So we said that what's so difficult about going and reading regularly? But when you think about it, there are a lot of challenges. Like reading a book means it's a great signal to show people that you're intellectually minded, but you don't get through the damn thing for various reasons. And so we said that we'll just give you this curated article, short article, spend 15 minutes on it. And then on top of that, you have to pay for it, because again, it's a signal to yourself that you're taking this more seriously than so essentially we are curating what is available for free. But you're doing this and you're paying for this because for you this is now important, and therefore that signaling also works that way. So a lot of things that you mentioned, I mean, really something that we've been also thinking about. The asynchronous part is also something that works really well with us.
The initial question was around productivity and all that.
So this is a good time for me to segue into building an audience, something that you've clearly done. And like you said, a lot of people struggle. You may say you struggle with, say, connecting with someone that you don't really know. For a lot of people, this whole building an audience for oneself, and that is something that has held you in good stead, especially while becoming a freelancer, launching a course, getting that seed capital for your course, right? Comes from an audience. So tell me a little bit about how should an individual think about growing and nurturing an audience? And it's easy these days. It's not as complicated as it once used to be. So what are the right reasons to do that?
I genuinely thought you were going to say it's actually more difficult these days. So I guess that's great if one person says it's very easy.
I meant from a tools point of view.
Yeah, from a tools point of view. See, the thing is, when you democratize something, it becomes easy for everybody to do it, right? Which means individual becomes more difficult for you. Like, you take the example of music right now, or any field. It is far easier to create music or content now than it is for anybody else, which means that the competition is a lot more.
And it's global as well.
And it's global as well. So suddenly now a musician is not just competing, a rock musician is not just competing with another rock musician, but also electronic musicians, TikTok musicians. Now you're also competing with Netflix and everything that universe has to offer, for instance. So as tools, as it becomes easier for thoughts to get out, it really, I mean, it actually, it becomes more difficult in a sense. Okay, so I'll try to answer this. Thank you for thinking that I do have an audience and all that, but I'll tell you what I've done and what's worked for me. I think with respect to growing my network as such, I've never really worked towards growing it. And I think that's the thing that's worked best for me. I've never really been obsessed about follower counts and things like that. I think the one thing that's worked for me, I was early on Twitter. I mean, early in the sense from an Indian point of view, it was 2009 that, okay, actually the story goes a little before that, if I may, because I think that has a path to lead in. I was a college student in a small town in Kerala called Thrissur, and
Correct.
I was desperate to get through an institute called MICA, which is which is an advertising institute in Ahmedabad. For the listeners, of course, you know what it is, Raman. And people who were writing cat in that small city were very small. People who had heard of MICA, let alone that being the sole institute that you want to go for, was non-existent. I'm pretty sure I was the only person in Thrissur who was aiming only for that institute. It made life very easy for me from a cat point of view, because everybody else was obsessing about how to turn their 95s into 99s. I just needed 99 and 95. And I think that is excellent career advice. I think that's excellent life advice across the board. Most people need a 95. I think a lot of content efforts, a lot of brands, etc., whatever, struggle because they need to signal 99. Aim for 95. It's actually not all that bad. Once you got there, then try to go up. As you can imagine, I am a huge believer in universal basic income, but that's a different show altogether, I believe. But coming to your question, so then what ended up happening from there is I found an online community called Pagal Guy, which anyone who has done an MBA from a certain vintage will remember. It used to be one of India's, it still is, though not as active, India's largest forum, the world's largest forum for MBA discussions and all that. And still some of my best friends today are from that community, etc. And the interesting thing about that is that Pagal Guy audience itself was very small numerically, but it was extremely influential, because these are guys who are going to B schools and possibly captains of industry and all those terms tomorrow. Now, what ended up happening was I became the MICA guy. I also became the poor jokes guy. I also became a few other things. I became a guy who knows a little bit about rock music, this thing, that thing, all that. So I was fairly active on the forums in those days. What ended up happening was a large part of this network happily transitioned onto Twitter. So when I landed on Twitter, I had this network of people in some sense. So I had that crowd. At the same time, I was in Bombay for the first time. So I was keen on seeing, okay, who are the Twitter folks over here? So then I started connecting with these guys, met up with some of them. Some of them became friends. I was very weirdly a part of this huge South Indian wave of early Twitter humor. Not sure if you know about all that, but it was a very esoteric, very different kind of humor. So you had guys like Anand Ramachandran, Big Fat Phoenix, Krish Ashok, legend, is also will be appearing on one of the episodes that I'm doing. A lot of guys, a lot of that influential early Twitter, all guys who are still at 4,000, 5,000 followers, by the way, because the humor is so esoteric, but shaped a large part of who I ended up becoming. And these guys are and all of these guys are huge people by themselves. It's just that they don't make the jokes and all that, which get them to 100,000, 1 million followers, like like all our comedians now do. They were like bloggers and like Sidin and all those sort of guys. Very tightly knit community, huge it was. And then from there, because I was early on Twitter and because I guess I just interacted with these guys, the following just very organically grew up. And I think it's like around 13K or 14K followers today, which I guess is decent enough, unless you are, of course, aiming to be an influencer and monetize your skills from that perspective. Again, a completely different talk show, I guess. So I have never really worked towards growing it. Let me put it that way. Like I've never really, because I find that if you are doing stuff for the sole purpose of growing your followership, then that's sort of like, to me, that seems like a weird goal to sort of have, both from an individual point of view and a brand point of view. I think. I think what's more important is, all right, 5,000 people have decided to follow you for something. Can you keep delivering them that? Because if it's work for 5,000 people, then I'll probably get 5,000 more. And if it doesn't work for the other set of people, fair enough. I don't want those. If I'll have to change who I am or the type of stupid humor that I'm putting out to cater to somebody else because I'm reaching a milestone, that's a very, very weird sort of goal to sort of have. I won't lie. There are times when I look back and say, like, okay, 15K followers is not a bad scene at all. But if you ask me, like, what are the things that have got me there? Not really. I think it's just a matter of luck, because I landed up at the right time, and it is just time. Anyone who's joined Twitter in 2009 and been reasonably consistent with respect to posting, especially about one particular thing or the other, is bound to grow their followership over a period of time. Now, what that network gave me was license to try a few other things, which then fed back. So I thought, okay, podcast. Hey, I announced to the universe, hey, Naren and I are starting a podcast. And people are like, oh, okay, that's amazing. So now it ends up, becoming, what's that thing that that all investors say in a flywheel. It ends up becoming a sort of, more people then listen to the podcast, then end up following me. So it ends up becoming more and more. So then, you start some projects because you have a ready audience for it. Today, I know if I were to start a different thing of my own, suppose I were to start an actual company of my own, right? And I put it out there saying that, hey, we have a team of whatever. I know if I put it out there, I know I'll at least get some interest. I still have to prove myself, but I know I'll get some interest. So I guess it's the benefit of a following, but then you need to wait. It needs to be very carefully nurtured. You can't bullshit your audience. If you've inorganically grown your following, suppose you bought your followers or something and you put something out there, it's not going to be authentic at all. You won't get those people who are actually interested in what you have to offer. So stay true to yourself. I know it's very, very cheesy, cliched advice, but the more, and I'm not gonna lie, the older I get, the more of these cliched, cheesy sounding lines, the more resonant they get. The older I get in life. I'm not sad about it at all. And honestly, that's how I've tried to grow my base. I think also what I try to do is, because when you work in advertising events and all that, you end up meeting a lot of people. You try to find out, all right, what are the different angles? What are the, how, I mean, it's sort of, it might sound a little bad to say this, but you almost need to think about, how is this person going to be useful to me later? And I don't mean useful necessarily from a money point of view, right? What are the various, like, what is the reason for which I might ring up this guy, right? Okay, is he going to be the guy who I call at 2 a.m. when I have a mental breakdown? Is he the guy who is going to recommend a book for me? Is he the guy who will, at a crisis, be like, for example, one guy who I very, very randomly knew. I knew two things about him. He was a photographer and he was in Delhi. It was a huge project for a client, F1 related project. Their photographer backed out at the last minute. I'm literally in a cab going to the venue, pinging him after years and saying, hey, listen, by any chance, are you free? These guys are desperate. They need, and obviously they are going to pay you a lot of money for this. This is boss done. Came down. We met up for the first time ever, I think. First or second time ever. So that's the thing. So you need to look at people in various different angles. Like it could be absolutely anything. Okay, this guy's gone to Humpy. This guy has, this guy has done scuba diving before. This guy knows how to get the best. Use your imagination. Everything. I think once you have that, you have a small map in your head somewhere, and I think that really, really helps. Like how I ended up becoming the digital guy for some reason. And the more they make signals about this, put it out on their social and all that, the easier it becomes to. I mean, the human brain is a remarkable machine. It just tries to compartmentalize information as much as possible. And I think that really, really helps. So I think I've done that a fair bit. I've often referred people and all that, which is why, I keep going back to freelance advice. When try to position yourself as something. If you say, hey, I'm a writer.
Correct.
Okay? Like, here's the thing. Every week I get at least 3 people asking me, do you know a digital marketing person? And I get 3 other people saying, I'm a digital marketing person looking for work, or I'm a marketing person looking for work. Now, the problem is I don't get any information more specific than that. I need something more information so that I can remember this and remember this. Let's face it, we are all busy people. We're taking lots of information at every point of time. We can't retain all this. If on the other hand, if one of these guys say, hey, listen, I need a Shopify dev. Do you know somebody who knows? Yes, this I know because somebody else has been making a lot of noise about it on my face on my Twitter, Facebook, whatever, I can connect you guys, or they are likely to show it off themselves. I've been to a couple of the design conferences and stuff, and something that I always like taking inspiration from other spaces and validating my own beliefs in the marketing space. And design is an excellent space to do that, because it's kind of related, but at the same time not so related. I remember one of the legendary designers coming and saying the biggest mistake he's seen in portfolios of young designers is them trying to be too much. I'm a designer. I'm also this. I'm also this. I'm also a photographer. I'm also an illustrator. I also can do this. Great, shows that you're versatile. But can I trust you to do any one of them right, as opposed to somebody who just says I'm an illustrator? It also shows that they've put investment into that one thing, forsaking everything else. It's actually a bit of a risk to say, hey, I'm going to do only this, right? Imagine if somebody said, hey, I specialize in SaaS marketing. Right? It's a huge risk for them, but at the same time, you're going to think, okay, if this guy says that he's a SaaS marketer, then I won't go to him if I have an FMCG project. But the moment there is a SaaS project that comes up, is going to go to him. I think trying to get to that level, I think, has been very, even if you're working towards unconsciously, I think is very, very useful. Growing an audience, I think the other thing that is very important is in terms of consistency. I think the first episode and second episode of anything will come out with a lot of enthusiasm, because you already have your pent up ideas and all that. The proof of the pudding is 3 months down the line whether the project is still active. That's honestly it. I think I heard a statistic somewhere that 95 or 96% of all podcasts have just 1 or 2 episodes. I'm not surprised at all.
Right.
The proof of the pudding is really in consistency, which also means from a freelancer point of view, you can't afford, or content creator point of view, rather, you can't afford to be disappointed by the lack of success of your first and second, or even your 10, 50. Correct. It happens. It's fine. It's completely fine. It's happened to the best of people. What ends up happening is you build up a certain sort of, nothing is linear. You end up building a certain equity over a period of time. So then Simplified reaches 100 episodes. Like, wow, Simplified has reached 100 episodes. Then you have people coming in, checking out the past things. Then the flywheel starts kicking in, flywheel snowball, whatever you want to call it. So I think so 2 things then, this entire long ramble, building an audience for content projects, I think 2 things are important. One is a sharp enough idea. I think, the sharper your idea is defined. I genuinely think that's why the Origin of Things has worked as well as it has, because the proposition is very, it's kind of clear. And I've seen this, anyone who has a very sharp, targeted idea for their newsletter or whatever, it tends to do well, even if it's among a certain cohort. And the second is consistency. I think just doing it for a period of time, or at least giving yourself a period of, say, 6 months or a year, and then taking a call on what to do with it, I think is very important. A third related thing that I'll just say, sort of metric to track, is don't look at numbers in isolation. Don't like, oh, I've got 10,000 downloads. Like, okay, great, but what does that actually mean? Are these people actually listening? I think what's more important is resonance with a smaller set of people who you actually like and believe in. Like, I realized getting Meta was decent when 3 people or 4 people who I have immense respect for pinged me and said, this is a great show. Now, to me, that is enough. It means that the show has passed muster for these 4 or 5 guys. If these 4 or 5 guys are the only people listening to it, that's fine. That's fine with me. Rather than 10,000 faceless people who I don't know. So if you are a content creator, take solace in that. And if you are a content consumer, please tell content creators that you like their work. You might think that for some reason we are inundated with fan mail, but we are genuinely not. I will, like, if I'm drunk in the middle of the night, I will take time out to reply to anyone who writes and saying that they like Simplified or the Origin of Things or whatever the case may be. So please do tell content creators, including musicians or whatever, that you actually like their work, especially independent guys, especially people who are hustling and doing it for a living. It means the world to them that actual listeners, readers write in and tell them. So yeah,
I think in a world where all of us are content creators, it would just be nice to tell each other that we are doing a good job.
Absolutely. 100%. I think gratitude is one of those things. I think gratitude is one of those things that has irrational benefits. One of the things when you're trying to do, when you're lazy and productive at the same time, is you try to see what are the things that have outsized effects, right? What are the things that might seem irrational? And like in some sense, it's like you pay 1 rupee, but you get 2 rupees worth, if that sort of makes sense, right? You say thank you, I get a thank you back. That's 1 rupee given, 1 rupee taken, right? But on the other hand, if you unexpectedly ping somebody and say, like, for example, I never told you this, but actually you played a huge part in my career and my thinking and all that, and that's meant a lot to me. I just want to say, to write that does not take too much, which means you probably spent 5 rupees, right? But you are going to get way more than 5 rupees in return. It may not be immediate, but it happens it adds up in sort of like it adds up in the long run. I was like one of the names that I told you, the early Twitter guys, Anand Ramanand, I'm a huge fan of his blog, Big Fat Phoenix, back in the day. Unfortunately, not active anymore. I consider him India's finest satire writer, a title that he refuses to take. We even referenced it in the first episode of Getting Meta, Amit and I. And when I just wrote him a fan mail saying that, hey, like, a gushing fan mail from whatever, an early 20-year-old or something. And he's like, you're in Bombay, no? Macha, come over to Infinity, let's have a beer. And I was floored, like, shit, like, I was genuinely nervous when I was meeting this guy, but I think meeting him and, he introduced me to a lot of other people, including, strangely enough, Amit himself. So that opened the door for another universe, which included Naren, who turned out to be my future. Like, I met Naren for the first time while I was with Anand at his house, we were watching the IPL or something. So yeah, I think just take chances. I think I think when you speak to a lot of these so-called successful content creators, successful entrepreneurs, they will acknowledge two things. One, they will acknowledge the huge part that luck has played in their success. But two is that they create luck. And what does creating luck mean? It just means putting yourself, if you sit in a room all day, I mean, a lot of us are doing that right now, but you know what I mean. Nothing's going to happen. You need to shoot your shot. You need to put yourself out there. You need to create opportunities for luck to come your way, if that sort of makes sense. About Gyan, I think that was. Let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, so show up, keep showing up.
Keep showing up. I think it's, don't do the regular thing. I think that's the other thing. Like, if you keep trying to conform to the medium, then you won't stand out. I still remember this one company that had come to campus for recruitment. I won't say the name for obvious reasons, but you know how it is during campus places, right? Everybody's CVs tend to gravitate towards the median, right? And everybody ends up having the same, I want to do this. This is what I like. Whatever, everything ends.
Everyone is Agent Smith in the Matrix.
Absolutely, right? So one of the clients, and most clients know this, and they happily go along with the process. One client put his hand around or so the story goes, cannot validate or otherwise, put his hand around the placement coordinator's shoulder and says, all these CVs are fine. Aapke batch mein saale log kaun hai? These are the guys who I want to hire. And excuse my Hindi, but yeah, that's basically what he said. Like, which of your batchmates are absolute, like, these are the guys we want to hire? Because see, for them, they were putting people out on the field for sales for a young company, and it made absolute sense to ask that question. But it's not something. Now imagine if somebody actually had the gumption to write that in a CV. It may two traditional companies might reject you, but I think standing out in some way is important. It's not as difficult as it sounds, to be honest. Just, I think the more authentic you are, the more just by being lazy and being authentic to yourself, you automatically stand out from a sea of people trying to gravitate towards the median. It's kind of like a strange world that we live in right now. So going back to how we started this long answer and question, it is in some ways more difficult than ever before, but it is in some ways easier than ever before. So yeah, I think the world would be better off if we just spoke what was on our minds instead of tying it in a lot of legalese and marketing jargon, to be honest.
Yeah, which is easier to do if you are a freelancer than
absolutely. Yeah, so if you're so that's another great reason to be a freelancer. You can speak your mind about the industry, which I very frequently do right now. Like, I'd like to think that I'm a critic of advertising as a profession, and there are some content projects in the pipeline which will elucidate on that a little more. And you're genuinely truer to what you believe in, and I think that's great. I think that's very, very liberating. Like I wouldn't be able to say half the things I say on Twitter if I was still working in an ad agency, at least with respect to marketing at least. But yeah.
Great, Deepak. We're almost at the end of our conversation. Before I get to the last segment, I want to do a quick quiz question on
Oh
the
wow.
origin of things. And no, we haven't told Deepak what to expect. But I expect you to get this because
I'm very bad with my own this thing. Like I see some of the episodes, like which brand was this? Like, so yeah, I surprised myself. But yeah, let's
Okay,
do
yeah.
this.
So
Let's do this.
we really like our quizzing at Choose to Think. So here goes.
Yep.
So in ancient Scandinavia, if you were using a hot piece of wood or iron to mark your livestock, what one word would describe what you're doing?
Oh, that would be branding, I guess.
Oh, absolutely
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's the origin of the word
That's the origin
branding.
of the word branding. Okay.
Yeah, and from the
Oh,
old
you're asking me
Norse
questions.
word.
Oh, you're asking me a quiz question. I thought you were going to ask me questions from the origin of things.
No,
Like
no,
I
no.
thought you were going to tell me the setup, and I'd have to say which
This
brand it was.
was also an origin question and also a meta question,
A
right?
meta
A question
question.
about branding.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
we've got everything together there. So
Let's
Deepak,
go.
before we quit, I'm just going to. This is a segment called the future relevance of
Okay.
X, and I'm going to throw a few X's at you, and just shoot what comes in your mind.
Sure.
So the first one is the future relevance of cats on the internet.
Cats on the internet never going away. They continue to be relevant as there are more and more mediums. Just imagine we haven't even the full potential of virtual reality hasn't come in. Can you imagine what's that's going to happen? So yeah, not going away. Cute on the internet, never going to go away.
Okay. Something that you mentioned in your course, the future of AR, VR in marketing.
Going to go up, I think, but we will see a lot less stunts and a lot more logic and actual. Okay, there is a reason why we are doing this. Yeah.
So a small segue there. How do you, as someone who's managing so many things, have you set aside time to kind of go and research stuff which is emerging, or how would you go and practice and get better at some of this so that you can pass on the right kind of advice to your clients?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you see some of the content projects that I do, they feed into that. The things of internet, while it might seem like it's just a content project, the work that I do for that or the reading that I do for that has multiple outlets, right? One is a newsletter, of course. A lot of it works its way into the course itself. Second of the other thing, I mean, it becomes additional dots for me to join and then say propose to clients, etc. So for me, a lot of the output that you see, there's a fair bit of research and stuff that happens before it. But then what I try to do with that one piece of research is try to knock off multiple projects. I try to maximize, if I'm reading something. But I do set apart time for doing this. I read at least 2 hours a day, which is a mix of news and this thing, all that. And there are some days, say, which are light on work, and one weekend day which they just devoted to reading. And this reading is the non-Kindle kind of reading, which are usually articles, long form and things like that. Although recently I have started sending articles to Kindle also, is a great way to sort of read. So yeah, I do this. And I don't think there's I don't think there's any way around it. Anyone who is in any space and wants to grow has to read, consume. And when I say read, I don't necessarily mean need to read a book or something. It can be a podcast, or you need to keep getting updated about these things. Otherwise you're going to be stuck with knowledge which was relevant maybe 5 years ago. And at least the space that I work in, marketing as also you and I work in, it definitely you need to keep yourself updated on not just campaigns, but what are the trends that are happening, which way are the winds blowing. It's not just enough to know. In fact, I'd say it's completely irrelevant to know which brand is doing what. Then you're just answering a quiz question. But more like, okay, over the last 5 years, how has advertising changed? What are the broad ways in which things are doing? Which is why I find things like competitor analysis and all completely pointless. Like, what's the point of one BFSI company saying, okay, let us look at what our competitors are doing? No, that's not the point. Look at the entire medium, how it's changed. Look at how people overall are, where is the puck going to be? I think that's very, very important. So yeah, I think it's very important to keep yourself updated on a few things.
On that, can you maybe recommend a book, one channel and a podcast that the last couple of years have influenced you? I know the standard podcasting question, but something that maybe you can recommend.
that has influenced me. Okay, not specific to marketing. Then
Not
I'm
necessary.
guessing. Okay, I think one person that has influenced me a lot over the last couple of years is Scott Galloway. He's a New York University professor of marketing. Very, very outspoken. He has his own podcast, the Prof G Show, the Prof G Pod rather. He also has another show that he does with the tech journalist Kara Swisher. It's called Pivot. Highly recommended. And he authors a beautiful weekly newsletter, free, called No Mercy, No Malice. Just search for Scott Galloway online and you'll find it. I think his way of thinking, his way of putting himself out there, and a small lessons. Like I found, for instance, that he is not shy of repeating the same thing again and again over multiple shows and multiple formats in 1 week and referencing that again and again. Before I would think, oh, you need to say 300 examples to show that you know what I and as a victim of my course, you will know that I keep throwing like random examples here and there. But now I'm trying to work towards, okay, let's take a few examples rather than showing that I know so much. Let's take one example and use that to emphasize the point rather than trying to show how much I know. So I think that's, small things that I pick up from him. So he's a brain that has influenced me a lot in terms of not just the content itself, but also how he approaches it and things like that. So he would be one person, podcast, etc., that I recommend. A book that I highly recommend, especially to those working in marketing, is Rory Sutherland's Alchemy. I think it's outstanding. Like, I think especially for anyone working in digital marketing, and say, oh, let's divert all our money from brand building stuff to search and all that because it leads to better ROI. Yes, it leads to better ROI in the long run, but you're destroying your brand in the long run. And as a lot of this podcast has kind of shown, really investing in the long term is the way to go, whether it is your career or whether it is finance or whatever, or brand building for that matter. So that would be another recommendation from that point of view. I mean, there are so many different kinds of recommendations that I do want to make. You asked for a book, which I think
this is good. I think
I think both, this should do, because I have like so many music recommendations and like lots of things, so I could go on forever with it.
Yeah, for more, please subscribe to Deepak's newsletter. Right, that's the best.
I actually also, if it helps, what I'll do is I'll send across a Medium post that I wrote about all podcasts and newsletters that I subscribe to and I recommend. So you can link that to the show notes, and whoever wants to check stuff out, I think, can find their own thing. I think it's important. I think one thing I've realized, freelancing or otherwise, is prescriptive does not work. I think everyone needs to find out what they gravitate more towards. Like, even though I'm big on music, for instance, I don't listen to that many music podcasts, for instance. So I think it's left to everybody to find their own sort of whatever it is.
Right. And before I go to my last question, I just wanted to call out that both Scott Galloway and Rory Sutherland, it's interesting that they have the book. Sutherland appears in a lot of podcasts. He's probably the most entertaining guest I've seen on a podcast. And so there is this content universe that you start to build around yourself. So my last question, therefore, is that what is the future of the so-called creator economy? Do you see more people becoming individual creators, taking charge, taking that control back? And is that going to be more and more mainstream?
It's such an interesting question, and to be honest, I don't know, and I'll say why. Because if you look at the trends right now, if you were to put a big barometer into where we are right now, everything says yes, right? Because a number of platforms are exploding, people are starting Substack, all the big platforms are starting their own content creation sort of tools to woo the creators. So Facebook is coming out with Bulletin, Twitter acquired the platform which I use, Review. Every Clubhouse, of course, doing its own thing. So there are now more and more ways for audiences to interact with creators or reward creators. Like YouTube has tipping, Clubhouse will now introduce tipping. So there's a lot of action now in this space, and seems like the word creator economy has suddenly become this huge thing. So, and it's definitely encouraging more people to become creators on their own, either full-time or otherwise. And we also hear of success stories in the US. Oh, this journalist quit his job and now runs a newsletter and earns $100,000 a year or whatever it is. But the thing is this, and I've learned to be very skeptical about internet trends in general, because I think at some point there will be saturation. right? Like I am a freelancer and I am able to devote 2 to 3 hours a day dedicatedly for reading, but not a lot of people do have that sort of luxury. What happens when the must see or must read content reaches a certain point? It's kind of like I genuinely will not be surprised if there is one platform that comes up that takes up a lot of these individual creators and puts it under one banner. Then wasn't that the same thing that a magazine was? Wasn't that the same thing that a newsletter was? So I think it might end up operating in some sort of cycles, right? I really don't know. Like I think there will be a few winners in this. I mean, I'm just looking to get by and do reasonably well. But I genuinely cannot predict what the future of the creator economy is going to be. I think there will be some winners, some losers, but I do think there will be some sort of consolidation that happens later. Because if you think about it, I mean, if you think about any space where there's so much activity, and just step out of the hype for some sort of time and see, okay, where is this? Suppose this continues on its trajectory, not on its line. Suppose it continues on its current trajectory. How is it going to end up? How is it going to impact the lives of everyday people? Do people really want 300 different creators of their own? Like, is that really going to happen? I think in some certain spaces it might really help creators. Like I already see how something like Bandcamp, for instance, is helping musicians so much. And for those not aware of it, Bandcamp is a platform that very counterintuitively in this streaming day and age allows fans of music to download music, pay for music and download, and it's used by a lot of independent artists. And especially, I mean, I obviously buy a lot of music from the space of progressive metal, rock, and post rock, and the kind of stuff that I do, but similar with indie hip hop and all that, non-aligned to the big labels. So you won't find a Metallica and Ed Sheeran and all that over there, but you will find like much smaller bands and stuff like that. Now 80% of the revenues over there goes to the artist, so that is a famously artist friendly platform which pays easily the most out of every platform that there is. But then they will not grow beyond a point, because not everybody will want to even pay an Ed Sheeran the full value of the album. Let's face it, because we live in that sort of an economy. So in that sense, I think a few creators who have their audience defined, audience tight, I think they will be able to subsist and have a lot more means of monetization. NFTs are another thing to watch out for in that space in terms of how creators can sort of monetize. And again, that's a completely different show, but I think it's very exciting what the future of NFTs and the changing winds of ownership means for individual creators. I would not be surprised if all this hype that we are seeing right now reaches some point, some sort of breaking point. I don't see, for example, a Substack and a Twitter and a Facebook and somebody else all having, I mean, they all say they want to enable content creation, all that, but there is a point, like just like how podcasts, for instance, I gave you that stat, right? 95% of podcasts are wanted. I think the same thing will happen to content creators. There will be some outsized winners, but I think a large majority of content creators will just go back to not being content creators. Well, fair enough. I mean, it is a test at some point. At some point, right? So the disappointing answer that I have to give your question is I genuinely don't know, but I'm going to be definitely observing it, because I think it has implications for all of us. I don't say this because I am a content creator. I think it genuinely has implications for the internet, for businesses, for everything. Like it changes everything, like from freelancing to how companies take talent. And it's going to be fascinating to watch. To me, the best thing about writing a newsletter like Things of Internet, for example, is getting sort of like getting the license to have an inside view of this entire circus that's happening around us, and not knowing what will, I mean, there are so many things that can change things immediately. And there are some things that are, it's like watching a film in slow motion where you know what's going to happen, but it's taking so much time to end up. So yeah, it's very, very exciting to watch the whole thing called the creator economy and everything along with it. Yeah.
I'm sure whatever that future be, I'm sure you will be there in it and right in the thick of things,
We
hopefully.
don't know. I mean, and I don't want to, and that's the thing, I don't want to put out a promise like that. For example, I'm not active on Clubhouse at all. That is supposed to be the next big thing. But I have stayed away from it for a number of reasons. One, I don't want to get into another time sink. And two, I don't know whether I probably will enjoy it, and if I had the time to devote to it, I might even have an audience, as you might say, over there. But it's something I've genuinely chosen to stay away from. Maybe it's a little bit of saturation. Maybe I feel like, oh, I'm already doing
Correct.
this is now do I want to do that also? So maybe there's a little bit of that also in there, right? Just like how some early bloggers did not get onto Twitter, Amit Verma being one of them, for example. So it's interesting. So I don't think a successful content creator is even necessarily looking for another platform. To be very honest, I think a lot of us are also fed up and saying, okay, everybody just get a grip on everything so that we can consolidate what we have right now. So for example, to your point, if say a virtual reality sort of content creator sort of thing becomes plausible in a couple of years, which I definitely see happening, I don't know if I'm going to be in the thick of it, for instance, because it also depends on whether that's the kind of thing that I want to do. If I'm comfortable doing something like that, do I have to do any sort of visual prep for something like that, which I'm not very good at. So I think, I think there are so many factors that come into play, but I'm definitely all for enabling any sort of content creation. I think the one great thing about TikTok, for instance, was it gave an audience that typically doesn't, and I'm speaking from an Indian context, and especially the, how non-metro cities used it, and it was fascinating. It just gave them a voice in some sense, and it gave them a creative outlet, which, say, a more elite platform, for whatever reason, like Instagram or something, might not have allowed them to. So I'm all for something and hope something like that does come up. Yeah. So lots of things to watch out for in India and around the world, across technologies, formats, everything. Looking forward to whatever comes.
So on that optimistic note, here's to hoping your voice stays strong.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deepak, so much for this,
and
for your time.
Thank you for humoring me. I think I blabbered on for a lot longer than I should have. So apologies to you and anybody who's listening to this, and to whoever has to edit this episode. But yeah, it was a total blast. Thank you for,
thank you.
like Scott Galloway would say, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about my favorite topic, i.e. me. So thank you for that.
Thank you.